What's going on, everybody? It's Dom from Lensprotogo and Lens Rentals, and welcome back to the channel. I have a pretty neat lens with me today, and it's from Venus Optics, the same brand that brought us the Laowa 24mm probe lens. So no surprise that this is kind of a funky lens too. It's the Laowa 15mm f4.5 0D shift lens. So Venus Optics already came out with a 15mm f2 0D lens last year, and so now we have the same focal length, except now it's a shift lens, and it's f4.5. And that actually makes this the widest full-frame shift lens in the world. So when it comes to meeting the demands of the niche lens market, Venus Optics is doing a pretty awesome job so far, and that's why I'm really excited to see what this thing can do. So in this video, I'll be talking about the build of this lens for a little bit. I'll be comparing it to other tilt-shift lenses. I'm gonna do a quick couple of tests in the studio, and finally, I'm gonna show you a couple of shots that I got using this lens in the city, where a shift lens is really in its element. Before we dive into the build of this lens though, I'll quickly just say that shift and tilt shift lenses are lenses that allow the optics in the lens to skew from the center, allowing one to manipulate the image that's entering the image plane. That kind of thing is absolutely essential for architectural photography or urban landscapes, where you ideally want to be shooting on a wide focal length, but you want to do your best to maintain the distortion of straight lines, like you see when shooting large buildings from the ground. And there is a difference between shift and tilt shift lenses, which I'll get into in a bit, but for now, let's talk about the build of this lens. This lens is just over 3 inches in diameter, about 4 inches long, and weighs 1.3 pounds. It has an excellent sturdy metal build and a rather bulbous front element, but that's characteristic of a shift lens. It's a fully manual lens with about 120 degrees of focus throw. It has a clicking aperture ring and comes in Canon EF and RF mounts, Nikon F and Z mounts, and Sony E mount. It's actually really similar physically to the 15mm f2 that they came out with last year. And in my best guess, this lens was probably a jumping off point for the development of this lens, but I can't say that for sure. Now, on to the good stuff, the shifting feature of this lens. So what this lens is doing is actually pretty simple. The lens mounts onto the camera like normal, but you use this ring here to slide the lens along a moving plane, allowing it to become off axis. And on top of that, that entire part of the lens can be rotated 360 degrees by this ring just beneath it. That shifting mechanism allows for 11 millimeters of shift from the image plane in 2 directions. But combined with the rotating ring, that allows you to rotate this lens in any angle you want in increments of 15 degrees. So this is a pretty unique lens, and there aren't a whole lot of lenses out there in the world that can achieve what this thing can. But if I had to bring another lens into this conversation, I would say that it has to be this one, the Canon TSE 17mm f4L. This lens has been around for quite some time, and although it's not as wide as the 15mm, it is a tiny bit faster, but the real main difference is that this lens is also capable of a tilting movement as well as a shifting movement, hence tilt shift. You can see here that separately from the shifting plane, this Canon lens allows the optics of the lens to pivot, allowing the light from the lens to hit the image plane at an angle. This tilting feature allows for that signature tilt-shift selective focus effect that you see so often in tilt-shift photography. So in the Laowa lens, you're not going to be able to get that effect because it's just a shifting lens. And that tilting feature in the Canon is what allows for that skewed focus plane. But for what this lens sets out to do, I think it does a pretty excellent job. So let's look at a few tests I did right here in the studio between the Laowa 15mm and the Canon 17mm. All right, so now let's take a look at a couple of shots I got from the city using this lens. And like I said before, this is one of the most practical environments for a lens like this because of all those super tall verticals from the skyscrapers, which otherwise are really hard to accurately represent in a photograph. Okay, so in conclusion, I think this lens is great at what it sets out to do, and I had a lot of fun shooting on this lens. So before I wrap up this video, I'm going to list a couple of things that I liked about this lens and a couple of things I would like to see improved. It's a really friendly size and weight, and that's always a plus. Next, the quality is excellent. It feels totally secure, and the shifting action also feels really smooth and rigid. Next, it only has one knob on the entire lens, and that's used to lock the shifting ring. And instead of a knob to control the shifting plane, that's done with this ring, which I love. Optically, I'm nothing short of impressed. This lens's claim to fame is managing distortion, and I think it does a great job at that. It's also pretty darn sharp, and it can articulate between distant objects better than I expected it to. Okay, a few downsides I have to mention though. This lens's diaphragm only uses 5 aperture blades. So anything stopped down from wide open from this lens is going to give you a pentagonal bokeh, which isn't really a big deal for me, but I know that's probably a big deal for a lot of people. Next, and this is a downside of actually all lenses like this, not just this one, but I'm always so worried about this protruding bulbous front element that sticks out like an inch from the front of the lens. That means you can't use any screw-on filters on this lens, and if this front element were to break, this lens is basically done for. All right, the last thing that was a bit of a disappointment to me was that this lens is just a shift lens, not a tilt shift lens. And since I'm basically completely new to tilt shift photography and tilt shift lenses, that means that I didn't know that this wasn't going to be able to do the cool selective focus effect like in the Canon, which I was kind of excited for. But if you're someone that's more savvy and knows what they're getting with these lenses, then you probably wouldn't have had that problem in the first place. All right, that's gonna wrap it up on this video on the Laowa 15mm f4.50D shift lens from Venus Optics. So this lens is actually not currently available for rental on our website, although it is going to be very soon. Venus was just kind enough to send us an EF copy of this lens for our review. So with that being said, thank you very much, Venus Optics, for letting me play with this thing today. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions about this lens or about tilt shift lenses in general, drop a comment in the comment section below and we can start a discussion. Also, if you did enjoy this video, make sure you hit that like button down below. And if you're not already, subscribe to the channel so you can stay tuned in for more of our weekly content. And we'll see you in the next one.